Holly, thank you so much. And thank you to the ClearSelf team for giving us the opportunity to be with you today. Let me go ahead and share my slides here, and we'll get going. Hopefully everybody can see this. So, yes, so today we are here to talk to you about the fascinating topic of transitioning from FIPS 140-2 to FIPS 140-3. So, um, this is actually hopefully is going to be more than just an informational webinar. We're hoping this really serves as the call to action because if you are a technology vendor that, for instance, is selling to the Carousel ecosystem to the public sector, if you have any cryptographic controls in your product, which most of you probably will, that's protecting federal data in transit or in storage, it needs to be FIPS 140 validated cryptography that you're using to do that. And right now there's a transition between -2 and -3. It's time-based transitions. The latest that has to be completed is by September 2026. That's the very latest. It depends on when your actual cryptographic modules sunset. It could be quite a bit earlier than that. So really, hopefully this serves as a call to action to make sure that your organizations have a good plan in place to make sure that you can migrate to the latest version of the FIPS standard before the -2 sunsets. So let's get into it. So first of all, just to give you a little bit of background on FIPS, just in case you have not been, living in the world of, FIPS cryptography. So FIPS is actually a standard from the National Institute of Standards, and it really covers how cryptographic modules, how encryption needs to be implemented. So you can kind of think about NIST really driving the standardization process, but then the implementation has to be secure as well, because a poor implementation can, undermine even a very strong cryptographic algorithm, right? So FIPS is really a program where the organizations can go through with their cryptographic modules and then get that stamp of approval from NIST. And really, it has become an essential requirement. So it is actually part of FISMA, but it's also is specifically called out in things like FedRAMP and covenant criteria and DoD APL and CNSA 2.0 and others, as you can see here, CMC 2.0. Essentially, usually the requirement is, again, if you have any sensitive government data that you're using either in transit or in storage, it has to be protected with FIPS 140 validated cryptographic implementation. And a lot of the time, you actually need to have your own certification on the NIST website that shows that you have this cryptographic module, and the cryptographic module really has to be active, because if it goes from active to historical, which we'll talk about in a second, what it usually means is that you can no longer sell your product to the government agencies, because they really want to see that you have active FIPS 140 certification. So it is really important, obviously, for most of you to pay attention to this and making sure that you have a good path to stay FIPS 140 validated for your cryptography. I see a polling question, so I'll just give a few seconds for people to answer. So just to tell you a little bit more, just kind of briefly, really, about the history of FIPS. So it is not a new thing. It started back in 1994 with FIPS 140-1. And then in 2001, we actually got FIPS 140-2, which has made some significant advancements. And so really for the last 24 years, most of the world has been, or at least people who are selling to the US government have been on FIPS 140, FIPS 140-2. And I don't want to give you the impression that the standard had not changed during that time. There is constant, or I should say frequent, transitions and evolution even within each version of the standard, because the bad guys are not standing still and the cryptanalytic techniques are continuing to improve. And of course, now we have this thing called quantum computers, which are becoming more and more powerful, that we are really believe they're going to break a lot of our public key cryptography, which we'll talk about here in a second. So the standards are evolving, but there's a kind of a big migration from FIPS and 40-2 to FIPS and 40-3. One of the reasons that NIST wanted to introduce FIPS and 40-3 is because FIPS and 40-2 was pretty much a, US and Canadian, standard, if you will. And with FIPS and 40-3, there was a desire to align with some of the ISO standards, so that kind of the international community can also start adopting, some of the same standards and kind of like have some commonality there. It also incorporated a lot of additional security requirements. I think we'll talk about that later in the presentation, but there's definitely, the bar has been raised with FIPS and 40-3 for sure. And even with -3, so the world has been sort of over the last few years slowly transitioning to -3. And again, there is a hard deadline to do that before September of next year, which we'll talk more about. But even within -3s, there's already new developments, right? So for instance, last August, NIST standardized 3 new quantum resistant algorithms. So those are now part of the FIPS and 4-3 standards as well. A cryptographic module can now go through the validation with NIST with the PQC algorithms as well. There's additional requirements around entropy sources, for instance, too, that's come out. I mean, if you think about the crypto system, you kind of have to have strong algorithms, which is what NIST, makes sure that we have. Strong implementations, which is essentially vendors like SafeLogic implement cryptographic algorithms, and then they go through the NIST validation process to sort of have independent verification of that, right, to get the FIPS and 40 stamp of approval, if you will. And then, the entropy has to be there as well. So if you have strong algorithms, strong implementations, but the key material that gets fed is weak, obviously it can undermine the whole system. So NIST is really getting more stringent around kind of how you're getting your entropy, and it's not enough to just say, oh, I'm just getting it from the operating system, right? There's actually requirements around FIPS validated entropy sources, which SafeLogic actually does a lot of work around as well. We actually just got our brand new FIPS validated entropy source just last Friday, which is kind of works in combination with our modules. So the point here is that there is a continuous evolution of things. Right now, the big transition is from -2 to -3. That's not the only transition that's going to happen, because again, the bad guys are not standing still. Technology is not standing still. So things have to kind of keep evolving. Let me tell you a little bit right now about what a traditional path to achieving FIPS 140 validation looks like. So if you're an organization and you are using, again, some cryptography in your product, which, again, most likely you do, because cryptographic controls is really the plumbing of kind of the digital privacy and trust these days. It's all kind of relies on cryptography, whether you're talking about, zero trust, or you're talking about, MFA, or, it's all underneath, cryptography has to work. So cryptography is there, it's fundamental. And if you have cryptography in your product, you have to essentially, get it FIPS validated if you want to be able to sell to the public sector, right? And of course, if you're an agency, if you're using products, right, you know this, but you need to make sure the products you're using are, have cryptography that's been FIPS and 40 validated. So a traditional journey for a vendor who is trying to achieve FIPS and 40 validation would be something like this. They would have to hire a consultant who specializes in FIPS, because very few people, live in this world and understand sort of all the requirements, and there's a lot of requirements to FIPS. They would have to then go and design and implement and document their module, working with that consultant. That would take some number of months. Then they would have to go and work. There's about a dozen labs across the US and Canada that have been accredited by NIST to do testing for FIPS. So they would have to work with the lab for 3 to 6 months, sometimes more. As part of that effort, you would get additional documentation done. You would work with a process called a CAVP. It's algorithm verification program, cryptographic algorithm validation program. That's a prerequisite to the full validation to really all the algorithms that you have in your module would have to be taken through this process to make sure that they perform as expected and proper outputs and all of that. Eventually, when you're ready, you would make a submission to NIST themselves into the CMVP, which is Cryptographic Module Validation Program. The first thing would happen there, you would go to what's called the queue, because there is a queue. You would be in a review pending status initially. Right now, if you sort of get in that queue, once you get into the queue, for you to go to actually point where NIST starts to review your module, then there's going to be a lot of back and forth, depending how good your submission is, questions, you may have to make changes, and so forth. Right now, from the point of like, once you get in the NIST queue, you're talking about 2+ years right now because of how backed up NIST is at the moment. They're working hard right now to add automation and do things, but the reality is a lot of it is still manual process. They are short-staffed right now, especially in the current environment. There's a hiring freeze. They can't get new people at the moment. So there's all sorts of things that are happening that make it challenging. So there's effort to reduce that queue, but right now the queue can still be in, just if you look at historically the last 12, 24 months, it's like 2+ years, right, to kind of go through the queue, and to add to that, you have to add your time for working with consultants, working with labs, and all of that. And of course, if you have any deficiencies in your submission, you could theoretically be there for quite a long time. So, and extensive testing has to be done for all the operating environments you want to claim in your certificate and so forth. So the program, the traditional process is time consuming. It can be frustrating. It can be costly. A lot of opportunity cost, because ultimately, I would imagine, you want to be developing your features and functions versus doing cryptography stuff, and obviously until the process is complete, you're kind of locked out from the federal opportunities to be able to sell your product if you are a software vendor, right, or a hardware vendor that has some sort of firmware that uses cryptography. So this is kind of the traditional process, and if you haven't started it yet, there's just not enough time before you get to FIPS 140-3, that FIPS 140-2 expires, which we'll talk about in a second. The other thing that's important to realize here is this is very far from a one and done situation. So you might think, okay, I've got through this 2.5 years of work. I did the effort. In the end, I got my certificate. Great, I'm done. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? You will get that certificate, and the certificate will say that you are good for about 5 years. I mean, that's what the typical validity of the certificate. The problem is that, again, because the bad guys are not standing still, because cryptanalytic techniques are constantly improving, NIST has to do those things called hard transitions, meaning that they have to change the standard, taking certain algorithms out, putting new algorithms in, changing padding schemes, changing key sizes, and things like that. Because without that, 5 years is a long time, right? That module was secure to begin with, may no longer be secure because of those changes. So essentially, what it means for the folks who do this on their own is that you will have to basically continue to sort of constantly live in this world of going through updates and revalidations to stay active on the NIST website. So because of that, if you were to look at the NIST CMVP website, which is public, you can kind of see history. And we're definitely not trying to single anybody out here. It's just kind of like showing you that a list of like certificates that routinely go historical before their 5-year date, because there's something that perhaps was not done in a timely manner to survive some of those transitions that NIST has. So essentially, this becomes a consistent effort that you have to do. And if you go historical for one reason or another, again, this could be a problem, because when you go into new procurement, typically they want to see an active FIPS validated certificate. For existing installations, it's agency by agency decision. They may allow you to stay, in place for a certain amount of time. But after that, they'll still want you to get back to active status. So again, where you want to be is active, not historical. Um, Also, it's important to get some terminology sort of right. Sort of sometimes I hear terms FIPS compliant, FIPS validated. I mean, those are not the same things, right? So validation is really a process of going with your cryptographic module, um, through the NIST process and getting, and getting your certification in place, right? So certification really means that you actually have a certificate that, like an agency who is considering procuring your products, they can go to the NIST website. It's a public website for the CMVP. They can look up your company name and they can see that you actually have a cryptographic module. And of course, they want to see that not only that you have it, but it's also active and not historical. FIPS compliant is a much weaker claim. This is really where you're saying, we don't have our own module, but we're relying on somebody else's module. Maybe it's an open source module, something like that. But the compliance is not always good enough because the compliance, it may not be tied to specific operating environments that you're using. So for instance, for common criteria, they want to see that you have specific operating environments that match. Compliance also means that you really have no control over what the third party does. So if like an open source project or something decides not to, whether it decides or something happens that they're not able to get through some of those hard transitions we talked about in a second, and doesn't make the changes to their module at a timely manner, this can basically mean that they will go historical, and then means that you will get impacted by that, right? So of course that could be very suboptimal. And again, when you go through the procurement process, a lot of the time, the procurement officer really doesn't want to see that you have your own certification with NIST on the NIST website, that the module is active, that it lists your product names, it lists your operating environments, it has a security policy that's aligned with what you're doing. So this is typically what we would consider to be the gold standard. So really, ideally, what you want to have is an actively validated cryptographic module in your name that's active on the NIST website that you have control over, right? It can make sure that it does not go historical. So short term, really the biggest challenge is this transition from FIPS 140-2 to FIPS 140-3. Just something that I wanted to emphasize, and I will repeat this again, is that September 2026 is the drop dead date by which, if there was any FIPS 140-2 module that was still active at that time, NIST will mark it as historical, because NIST really wants to get people off Dash 2 and into Dash 3. Right, so that does not mean that it will happen on that date, meaning that's the last date, right? So if you're using some module that has expiration date or sunset date that's earlier than September 2026, it could happen earlier, but it's definitely not going to be any later than September 2026. So again, the 2+ year process right now is kind of what it would take right now to go through your own validation to get FIPS 140-3. And because NIST has raised the bar in terms of requirements for Dash 3, it's even more difficult to do this on your own and go through this process than it might have even been with Dash 2. And the bar is going to continue to go higher and higher with post-quantum cryptography requirements, entropy requirements we talked about, and there is certainly going to be other upcoming requirements as well. So just I'll actually see a polling question, so I'll give just a few seconds to answer that. So you might ask, what are some of the examples of some of the changes in Dash 3, some of the enhancements from Dash 3 versus Dash 2? There are quite a few. This is not a comprehensive list, but this is just to kind of give you a flavor. So first, I guess, again, it's aligning with some of the ISO standards to ensure, global interoperability and recognition of the validated cryptographic modules worldwide. So that has been definitely a big driver for FIPS 140-3. If you have a module that's like FIPS has like 4 different levels, from level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So for instance, like level 1 is typically software modules. Level 2, level 3, level 4 begin to have some physical security requirements for tamper resistance and so forth. So there's enhanced physical security requirements in Dash 3. There's some improved provisions for key management practices. Definitely improved and increased focus on software security. So for instance, when you go through the FIPS and 4-3 validation, it's not only enough to show that your cryptographic module meet the FIPS requirement. You also need to show NIST, the labs and NIST, the software development process that you're using to develop the module meets the requirements, right? And I'm a big believer in this. I come from a background in software security. You cannot have secure software products without a secure software development lifecycle that's being employed to deliver and to develop that software. So FIPS and 4-3 does a really good job recognizing that and raises the bar when it comes to that. Um, and then updated testing and validation processes. So again, there's a higher level of rigor by both labs and NIST to make sure that the implementation is as good as possible, meets the requirements. And this is very important. This is not one of those things that is just like compliance checkbox for the sake of having compliance checkbox, right? Look, most of the issues in cryptography historically have been not necessarily weak algorithms. They have been poor implementation of algorithms, right? So if you think a few years back of issues like Heartbleed, if you remember, it caused a lot of problems. That was a memory management issue, right? That was all implementation related. So this is all to say that there's a very good reason that NIST is doing all this, because you really want to make sure that you have strong cryptographic implementations, and especially as you begin to migrate to now post-quantum cryptography and things like that, you want to make sure that you don't sacrifice the quality of the implementation. So again, just to sort of make this very, very clear, and again, when I said call to action, this really is a call to action. 9/21/2026. If you remember anything from this presentation, remember this date, because this date is not changing. This is the date where, again, all still active FIPS and 4-2 certificates will be sunset and declared historical on September 21, 2026. Historical means cannot be used for new procurements, and whether they can continue to be used for existing installations as government agency by agency decision, but mostly the agencies want you, meaning the vendors that sell to the government, to be using active FIPS and 40 validated cryptography. And again, if you don't have a plan to migrate to FIPS and 40-3 before this date, you will be shut out of new government procurement. So if this is important for you to be able to do business with the government, you really need to make sure that you have a good plan right now to get in -3. And certainly you should be talking to your suppliers about that too. If you're agencies, you definitely want to be talking to your suppliers about their plans to get to -3, because this is coming, and this is coming very soon. So let's do a little bit of math here, right? So we talked about if you do this on your own, the timeline looks something like this. So again, the September 2026 is a drop dead date for FIPS and 40-2. Since doing this on your own takes 2+ years, like we just talked about, if you start right now, the earliest you're going to get a certificate is like going to be April of 2027, potentially later, right? So that is essentially 6+ months that you're going to be out of the market, meaning you're not going to have FIPS validated active cryptography in your product. That's 6+ months that, again, you will not be able to sell your solutions. So this is obviously not a great situation. And if your submission encounters some quality issues, I mean, this may be much longer, right? You could be still go through this process even far longer than this. So we think that there's a little bit better approach. We'll tell you a little bit sort of how we do this at SafeLogic. So with SafeLogic, we have this thing called FIPS validation as a service. We can essentially get you FIPS on 40-3 certified in about 2 months, which means you will take one of our modules, which have already been FIPS on 40 validated. You'll integrate this and start using it. We'll then also work with NIST to get you your own certificate in your name. And so it takes about 2 months to do that. And then, our certificate, goes on, for many years and will essentially cover you through any transitions, anything coming down the line. We'll talk about that more in a second. But essentially, it's rather than building your own, you could reuse what we have already done and sort of solve that problem, for yourself. So we're certainly biased, but we certainly think this is the better way to go. But whether you use SafeLogic or you choose a different approach, I just want to urge you to really not forget about this 9/21/2026 deadline and really give good thought to how you're gonna get to -3 before then, and how you're gonna also make sure that you stay active and validated, throughout, sort of the life of the module that you're using. Let me just tell you a little bit. First, there's a polling question, so I'll just give you a few seconds to reply to that. Let me just tell you a little bit about sort of SafeLogic and who we are, right? So SafeLogic is a cryptographic software company, right? Our whole motto is like we want to make cryptography simple, right? We don't want you to sacrifice quality, but we want you to not have to be cryptography geeks, and we want you to use the best possible cryptography as easily as possible, right? So we've been around for over 13 years, and we really kind of think about you know building cryptographic solutions that enable enduring privacy and trust in the ever-changing digital world, right? We really believe that cryptography is the plumbing of the digital world and really allows for that privacy and trust to thrive. Most of the time people don't want to think about plumbing until something happens, right? So we kind of want to be, those pipes that are, up to standard. The standard in our case is NIST, but essentially, kind of like thinking about our business, we kind of have our CryptoComply cryptographic modules, which we'll talk about in a second. And we provide, FIPS 140 validation as a service, which we'll go into some detail in a second. And we also provide post-quantum cryptography solutions to assist you with PQC migration. And we also provide, not shown on the slide, but we also provide entropy solutions as well, like I mentioned a second ago, for kind of NIST validated strong sources of entropy for randomness that's used for key generation. So first, FIPS validation as a service has been very popular offering, with us. It essentially has three pieces: CryptoComply, which is our software that has been FIPS validated that you could, license from us. There is a Rapid Cert, which is a quick 2 months process for us to get you certification in your name versus you spending 2+ years trying to achieve that. And Maintain Cert, where we maintain not only your software, but also your certification over time. So just a little bit more about each one of those. So CryptoComply is our extensive library of FIPS 140 validated cryptographic modules. We cover a wide variety of environments. So we have people using us from like IoT and embedded environments all the way to mainframes and everything in between, mobile servers, on premises servers in the cloud. Essentially everywhere the cryptography is used, we try to have interoperable solutions. We try to be drop-in replacements for like the popular open source out there, like Bouncy Castle or OpenSSL, so that we're easy to put in. You don't have to change your whole setup to put in SafeLogic. If for some reason you're not happy with us, we're also easy to take out, because again, we're not asking you to change your code to use SafeLogic, so we keep the switching costs low for you. Essentially the idea is that we get those modules validated on a very extensive set of operating environments. I think for FIPS 140-3, for instance, we have the most extensive support of operating environments, because we know that our customers use a wide diversity of environments. We can always add additional environments as well as needed, but we do start with a pretty comprehensive set already. We have a lot of expertise in building cryptographic modules So one of the things that becomes very important is having the right design, is keeping that cryptographic boundary, that FIPS validate boundary very tight, because anything within that boundary, if it changes, the module has to go through revalidation. So we do that, and then essentially once you plug in our modules, you can immediately claim that you are FIPS compliance as long as you use it in FIPS mode in accordance with the security policy. And the other nice thing is that you can actually change your own product. Sometimes people think that their whole product has to be FIPS validated, and that is usually not the case, because FIPS does not apply to your whole product. FIPS applies to specifically to implementation of cryptographic algorithms your product is using, which means that you can plug in a SafeLogic module, have it handle your FIPS, and then you can make any changes you want to the surrounding product, have your own product releases, and that does not impact FIPS validation status. So that is a pretty nice thing. So again, this is not a complete list, but just kind of to give you a sense of the wide coverage we have. I would say that we probably offer the most comprehensive support for whether it's drop-in compatibility or whatever programming language you use, where you want to use cryptography from, or operating system support, or again, platform types and so forth. So we have a wide variety of modules that we can bring to bear. And usually in your environment, you may have different types of programming languages, technology stacks, and so we can sort of bring, if needed, different types of modules to cover your whole environment, because we understand that you want to cover your whole environment. You don't want to solve like 80% of the problem. You want to solve 100% of the problem and move on to other things. So again, Crypto Comply, Rapid Cert, Maintain Cert, it all comes as a subscription, all bundled together. So Rapid Cert piece of it is, once you start using our modules, we'll send you a questionnaire. The hardest question there is probably going to be, what do you want to call your cryptographic module? So we'll get that information from you, and then we'll work with labs and NIST to essentially get you your own certificate in about 2 months. The nice thing is that you never have to interact with labs and with NIST. Like, we basically cover all of that for you in a white glove fashion. So once you get that certificate, Maintain Cert is really both kind of white glove support for your software and your certification. So software perspective, people use cryptography in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes people have custom tool chains. Sometimes people need different compiler options and so forth. We'll do all those builds for you per your requirements. With all the modules need from us, we'll handle all of that. We'll obviously handle any updates for you and provide updates, and any CVE fixes. And of course, as NIST changes requirements, whether it's some transitions in algorithms, maybe it's a larger key size or changing padding schemes, or even like right now, the big ones are, of course, is FIPS on 4-3 migration and PQC. We'll provide you with those updated modules for you to use. So thereby we sort of maintain not only your software, but also maintain your certification over time to make sure that your own certificate and your name that we get for you will stay active with NIST. So it really is designed to be sort of a white glove, easy button solution for FIPS. Right now we're talking about FIPS on 40-3 as being the big driver for many organizations. But working with SafeLogic, we're actually going to future-proof you for future transition. The big one right now is post-quantum cryptography. Our customers who have a subscription with us, not only are they getting -3 upgrades and certification there, they're also getting future-proofing for post-quantum. We're proud to be at the forefront of PQC, products and discussions, and our work with NIST as well. So all of that is covered as part of your subscription with us. So just to say a little bit more, we actually have a separate webinar that we did also with Caresoft for PQC migration. So if you're interested in the PQC topic specifically, I would encourage you to listen to that webinar. And certainly, always happy to hear from you if you'd like to just reach out directly. So just to give you a little bit of a sense, so there's a lot of work that SafeLogic has been doing on PQC migration. We actually work very closely with NIST and CCOE, where we're honored to be the lead for the PQC migration and prioritization work stream over there. And so we've been sort of very trying to get ahead of this, such that we have PQC solutions that are FIPS 140 validated, available when our customers are ready to adapt. So whether it is doing discovery, and for discovery, by the way, we actually just announced a partnership with a company called Tycon. They are leading provider of ACDI solutions. So ACDI, if you're not familiar with the acronym, it's a cryptographic discovery. So kind of like discovery cryptographic inventory. So we have a solution that kind of a combined solution with Tycon, where they can help you discover what you currently have and where you have quantum vulnerable cryptography, and we can actually support very streamlined remediation of that with SafeLogic cryptographic modules in a way that's FIPS 140 validated, in a way that supports policy-driven crypto agility, meaning you can plug in our modules in many cases, without having to change any application code, right? So it's easy to kind of like plug them in, and you can actually define policies that sort of specify different cryptographic algorithms and configuration used based on sort of the policy, right? So crypto agility, we kind of view that as a very important concern, because once you migrate to PQC, you also want to do that in a crypto agile way, because there's going to be future cryptographic transitions, and you don't want to have to incur a lot of effort each time you do it. We have support for all the the PQC algorithms that have been standardized by NIST. We support things like hybrid mode. So if you are you want to, maybe for defense in depth purposes, maybe you want to use both FIPS 140-3 validate classical cryptography alongside with PQC. We can support sort of that hybrid encryption. CNSA 2.0 mode, we're increasingly have existing and also growing support for memory safety, because we believe implementations in memory safe languages are fundamentally important, because it's unfortunately way too easy to make some mistakes in languages that are memory unsafe, that can lead to issues such as heartbleed, which I mentioned before. So anyway, if you're interested more in the PQC migration, I encourage you to listen to the other webinar. This is really FIPS 140-3 transition, but wanted to point out that there's another transition that's coming rapidly with PQC, and if you work with SafeLogic, we'll future-proof you for that transition as well. We have a new product we released recently, which is called CryptoComply PQ, so CryptoComply Post-Quantum TLS. This is really our attempt to get people out of sort of admiring the problem to actually fixing the problem. So like, let's go beyond sort of inventorying and planning for PQC. Let's actually make the decision to start addressing things. We know we have a bunch of vulnerable TLS connections in the world, data in transit. We know that there's a category of attacks called harvest now, decrypt later, where the bad guys can harvest the data from that data in transit from those TLS connections. They can't yet decrypt it yet without a quantum computer that's sufficiently strong. But when such a computer exists, they will be able to do it. And if that data is still sufficiently sensitive, that it becomes a problem. So why not start solving it now? So we have this CryptoComply PQ TLS, which can very easily be deployed to sort of replace your quantum vulnerable TLS connections. It's a very crypto agile deployment. You can run it in a pure PQC mode. You can run it in a hybrid mode, like we just talked about. If you want to allow maximum interoperability, you can downgrade to just classical encryption if you want. All of that is controllable with that kind of policy-driven crypto agility that I mentioned a little bit earlier. But really, we sort of believe that it's important to stop just admiring the problem when you really need to start addressing the PQC migration, such that organizations can be more secure tomorrow than they were today. And again, this is all part of our cryptographic library. So we're not a PQC startup. We have been at this for 13 plus years. So, and we believe very strongly that as the world migrates to PQC, it's important that the new pipes they're putting in, the next generation pipe, they're quantum resistant. So you're moving from like a leaky polybutylene pipes to copper piping. You want to make sure that piping is up to standard, right? Because you don't want to introduce additional vulnerabilities in the migration, because that's going to be nirvana for the bad guys, right? So in the world of cryptography, that standard is FIPS, FIPS 140-3. So this is what we're pursuing. We're pursuing, complete FIPS 140-3 validation for all the PQC algorithms that were standardized last August. In the meantime, with CryptoComply PQ-TLS, we're one of the few vendors that actually has like a CAVP tested MLChem algorithm. So CAVP, I mentioned a little bit earlier, is a cryptographic algorithm validation program. It's a kind of a precursor to the full CAVP. So our MLChem, which is the quantum resistant algorithm for the key exchange mechanism, has gone through CAVP testing. We have certification for that. If you use it in hybrid mode with our FIPS 140-3 validate classical, you are essentially able to meet both the PQC requirement and the FIPS requirements. You kind of check both boxes. Thereby, even if you're a regulated environment like government agencies are, you can start adopting this today. You don't have to wait. And again, if you have a subscription with us for FIPS 140-3 transition, you would also get access to all those PQC solutions as well. Once we have today, as well as kind of the successor products that are coming. And there's going to be a lot of new successor product coming, just simply because the rate of change right now is very fast. So we've been fortunate to have fantastic customers. Those just some a small snapshot of some of the well-known companies who use SafeLogic solutions. So just to kind of summarize real quick, so FIPS 140 validation as a service, will save you time and money, right? So essentially, you don't have to work with labs, you don't have to work with NIST, you don't have to become expert in FIPS, you don't have to expend effort in that. Your opportunity cost is minimized. You can reduce your time to market by not being locked out, and you don't run the risk of being locked out in the future because your FIPS validation goes historical. You get your certification in 2 months versus 2+ years. Again, first the time to market and revenue, predictable costs over time, because when you have to work directly with consultants, with labs, with NIST, those costs add up and you don't exactly know what it's going to be. Plus, obviously, your internal costs. Here with the subscription model with SafeLogic, it's fixed costs every year, so you know exactly what you're getting into. And again, eliminating the risk of going historical. Just remember, it's not just about getting to -3. It's about maintaining it over time and keeping yourself in active status. I mean, that is something that is, our job to make sure it doesn't happen, because, we're responsible to keep your certification in your name, which is, again, the gold standard. You want to have certification in your name, keeping it active over time. So again, the 3 needed pillars we have with FIPS 140, with CryptoComply, with Rapid Cert and Maintain Cert, which collectively we call FIPS 140, FIPS Validation as a Service, is a pretty unique offering. I think you should consider as you consider your options for how you're going to get to FIPS 140-3 before September 2026. I see there's a polling question, so I'll just give a quick second for that. So again, we very much appreciate our partnership with Caresoft. I really thank the Caresoft team again for giving us this opportunity to present to you today. All of our offerings are available, via Caresoft. We're in a number of, vehicles, contract vehicles via Caresoft. So if you're interested to see how we can support you either through your FIPS 140-3 transition and also future-proof you for post-quantum cryptography needs, entropy needs, or really any other cryptographic software needs that you have, I hope that you would consider taking a look at us. And again, you can work through Caresoft for the information procurement pieces of that. So just kind of to summarize, um, implications for both technology vendors and integrators. You know, so you really need to plan for FIPS 140-3 migration for all the cryptography in your products. You want to consider your options. I mean, if you already have the problem solved, that's great. If you don't have it solved, you really have to figure out, you know, how you're going to do this. Doing this on your own at this point, I don't think makes sense. I don't think it really truly ever makes sense, but particularly right now, you're just not going to be done in time before the deadline. You really want to ideally find a vendor that can help you accelerate and streamline the process. You also want to align with your release schedule too, because it's not just getting about, you know, getting FIPS 140-3 module from somebody. You also need to time to integrate this into your environment, right? SafeLogic, we try to make it easy because again, we try to be drop-in compatible with different open source that you may be using today. You can put us in. Um, um, but still, you will need time to put this in your environment, to test in your environment. If you are currently in FIPS 140-2, there are some obviously differences between -2 and -3. One example is triple DES algorithm was still allowed in -2. It's not allowed in -3. So if you're, for instance, using triple DES somewhere, you're not going to be able to use a FIPS 140-3 validate module because it's just not allowed there. So you will obviously need to migrate to, you know, another symmetric algorithm like AES or something. You also want to make sure that, again, whatever you choose is a solution for FIPS 140-3 cryptographic module that will keep it validated over time. It's not just about getting something right now. You want to get something right now. You want to get your own certification, so not just compliant, but validated and certified. And you want to find something that gives you the assurance that it will keep you validated actively over time through all the future transitions and will hopefully future-proof you for PQC migration and other transitions such as entropy that are happening right now. So, you know, if you're already a SafeLogic customer, we thank you very much. You know, we already have you covered for the FIPS 140-3 transition. So please talk to us today so we can plan together how do we get you on our new modules if you're not yet using our new modules. So with that, let me pause and let me take any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Evgeny. And again, if you'd like to submit a question, please look to that Q&A pod at the bottom of your screen. The first question we've got is, does the availability of FIPS 140-3 make FIPS 140-2 obsolete?
So just availability of -3, no. I mean, -3 actually has been available since about 2019. And you can actually use for a period of time, if you can actually use both -2 and -3 module in the same installation. There's actually nothing that says that everything has to be in -3 or everything has to be in -. So essentially, if you still have some -2 and you begin to get some -3 modules, you can actually use them together as long as they're active. Now, the kicker is that September 2026, like we said, is the latest date that any FIPS 140-2 module will remain active. And if you're still using FIPS 140-2 today, you should really look at the particular certificate that you're relying on, whether it's your own or maybe you're pointing to somebody else's certificate. You really should check what its sunset date is because the vendor is not going to be able to, it's not going to be able to extend it beyond what it is right now. So if it is before September of 2026, that's when it's going to be. So yes, you know, just having -3 out there does not like invalidate -2, but what will invalidate -2 ultimately is that September 2026 transition. It's going to be, NIST will say no more -2, that's active. Hope that makes sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Evgeny. Then for our next one, it says, can you clarify if FIPS 140-3 certifications are issued purely for products and modules used for encryption of data in transit versus data at rest?
Yeah, so good questions. So really, you can think of the module as like a toolkit, right? It provides you cryptographic algorithm implementations. So you can use them for data in transit protection, to data at rest protection. You can use it for signatures, right? So essentially, it's a set of algorithms you're getting access to that have been properly validated and vetted. And our customers use it for all sorts of use cases, for in transit, at rest, authentication, signing, whatever your use case is. It's kind of a general purpose cryptographic toolkit and library, if you will.
Awesome, thank you. And then for the next one, is SafeLogic going to offer an ESV module?
Yes, great question. I love this question. We actually just, like I mentioned, we actually just got our certification for our ESV, which stands for Entropy Source Validation. Sorry. So we actually just got our ESV last Friday. It's an ESV that's works with SafeLogic crypto comply modules. Also, if you happen to use something like OpenSSL 3, for instance, we can also plug it into OpenSSL 3 because OpenSSL 3 doesn't have its own entropy source. It's validated across all the same operating environments that we have on our FIPS 4-3 certificate, which is like 28 something different operating environments. And yeah, we can also add additional environments as needed too, if you have specific environments that are not currently covered. And yes, so we're actually going to be announcing GA of this product next week at the RSA conference. So I'm giving you a little bit of a preview here. The name of it is going to be Crypto Comply Entropy Provider. And like I mentioned, if you do have that subscription with us, that FIPS Relational Service, we will also get access to the Crypto Comply Entropy Provider as well. So definitely an emphatic yes to that question.
Awesome, thank you. And for our next one, can you explain how the ESV or PQC additions to the FIPS 140-3 standard will affect certificates issued before those additions are made?
Good question. Good question. So in the case of entropy source validation, what's happening is this. So if you're subject to common criteria, for instance, then the requirement actually kicked in January of this year. So if you're like going through a new common criteria validation, you'll need to have your own ESV. And if you already started doing that, you probably already heard about this. so that's there. For all the other for all the other modules that get submitted to NIST CMVP program, starting January of 2026, you will need to have an entropy source. Anything before then is considered to be grandfathered in, at least for now. So if you have a -3 certificate right now that does not have its own entropy source, you should be good with that certificate until it sunsets, unless NIST introduces a hard transition and forces you at some point to get an entropy source or forces you into historical. I mean, NIST always reserves that right to do that. We don't know that they will do that or not. But for us, like for instance, when we're now going through the validation for our next generation module, Crypto Comply version 4, that has all the PQC algorithms, even though we are submitting it to NIST before January of 2026, we're choosing to do the submission with our own entropy source because we want to get ahead of the requirements. And if there's a hard transition, we don't want to take the risk. We don't want our customers to have to take the risk. So we want to already be compliant with the latest requirements. For PQC, you don't need to have PQC right now in your mod. I mean, if you have a FIPS 4-3 certificate for just classical, you're fine with that. NIST did put out some timelines though, so by 2030, they're going to start deprecating some of the algorithms like RSA and elliptic curves, and by 2035, they're actually going to have a hard transition to disallow, right? So you still have some time. I wouldn't recommend waiting. I would recommend that you should start talking to your vendors. Whether you're getting your cryptographic modules from SafeLogic, from some open source project or somebody else, I would definitely start having a conversation with them about like, what is your plan to get PQC and get that validated, because the migration will take time, right? So we're certainly not waiting, and we're making that available to our customers. And I can tell you that there's a lot of interest to just get going on this, and we're really busy actually with PQC work right now. So there's nothing immediate like your certificate will get invalidated or something. You have a -3 certificate, you don't have PQC algorithms, nothing like that. But you really do want to plan around getting on with it, because there's going to be this deprecation and disallowance that's coming from NIST for anything that is not quantum resistant.
Perfect. Thank you. Then one last one. What impact will FIPS 140-3 have on CMMC 2.0 certification?
It's a great question. Yes. So, so yeah, CMMC 2.0 really does, require you to have FIPS 140, validated, modules, or, if you use products that are protecting sensitive data, federal data in transit or in storage, it really needs to be FIPS 140. So it's really the same thing we just talked about here. If it's currently FIPS 140-2, the latest date it's going to stay active is September of 2026. So you really need to have a plan to get a FIPS 140-3. So we have plenty of customers coming to us right now with CMMC as the driver to get to -3. So certainly, you need to plan around the transition to -3 with everything we just talked about. If you are subject to CMMC 2.0, if you're subject to FedRAMP, if you're subject to common criteria, DoD APL, or in general, you're subject to FISB, which is pretty much everybody like going through the sort of the GSA schedule. So like, I mean, so yes, absolutely, you need to plan for transition to -3.